Welcome to the People's Forum. Welcome back, world. Welcome back. We have a fantastic show today. This show covers art, it covers history, it covers the life's blood of the world's people. It is needle arts and the textile industry. With us today is Michelle Bishop, the executive director and founder of Harlem Needle Arts. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
I have been dying to get you here. Now that we have you here,
Yes.
you're on the couch, you're on the set, we're going to sit and talk.
That's right, real talk.
All right, all right. And we've known each other how long?
Oh boy, too many years to tell. Just
Okay.
know more than half our lives.
All right. Well more than
More
half
than
our
our
lives.
lives.
Okay, all right. Give us a brief description. Who's Michelle Bishop and where'd you get the idea to get this thing started?
Well, you know, Michelle Bishop, I always like to say I'm an African by way of Barbados, by way of Harlem and Dykeman, Washington Heights in the hood. And I was inspired to start Harlem Needle Arts for a couple of reasons. One, I was trying to teach my mother how to crochet. She wasn't listening. So I went out into the community to find classes, and there were never any workshops around. The nuns stopped, the community centers weren't teaching. Then the other part of it was that I saw so many creative people around me, but the world didn't know about them in a certain way, or the opportunities weren't presented. And I knew that textile art had a place. Most museums in the world have some form of an African department or archives, and included in that is some form of textile.
Textile. Yeah, indigenous people throughout eons have all been heavily into textiles.
Textile, exactly. It's a representation of who they are culturally, what their heritage means, what their ethnic group is within a certain frame of our country. So it was very important to me to sort of start this dialogue first through instruction, then through documentation. And so we preserve fiber, textile, and needle arts in the African diaspora.
Well, I have to let everybody know I'm a professional at macrame and lanyards.
There you
Because
go.
I was heavily trained as a young person
To use our hands.
to use my hands.
Exactly. And that is part of who we are. I think we got away from that in sort of this industrial society. And that, you know, it was also looked down upon. I have someone who is in the world who said her mother forbade her from learning how to sew because her mother didn't want her to work in a factory. So her grandmother would kind of sneak and teach her how to sew. So it was almost, it still looked down as something like, almost like it's for the peasants, or it has no value. But in everything we do in life, it has something to do with some form of textile.
In reality, it's a highly, highly skilled profession. Highly skilled.
Extremely highly skilled on so many levels. And I think as we live and we see it now, we see that culturally, we see the indigenous communities of Native Americans. We see the African diaspora, the Caribbean communities in that diaspora. We see those aspects of the world in textile on trend in fashion. You know, people are talking about cultural appropriation and things of that nature, but textile is a heavy influencer, a lot more direct than we know it to be. So we definitely want to continue the platform of presenting work both in a traditional and a contemporary aspect.
Would you consider the textile in the broad sense to be the foundation for many communities?
Definitely. We are born and wrapped in textile, and we, throughout our lives, have ceremonies. We have christenings and baptisms. We have quinceañeras. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Sorry, my Spanish is not that great. We have sweet 16s. We have coming out in parties. We have initiations. We have, you know, we have what else? We have weddings. We have all sorts of celebrations, and then when we pass on, our bodies are wrapped in cloth, or we're dressed a certain way, or we're draped, our coffins are draped a certain way. So textile, the infusion of different textile is always part of who we are.
I'd like to say to the audience that textile was probably the #1 industry in the world for
In
hundreds
trade.
and hundreds of years in terms of trade, in terms of cotton and hemp and different fibers
Silks, yes.
and silks, finding different routes, silk routes and silk roads, and then finding people to do that work, to grow that cotton to...
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, one of the reasons why enslaved Africans were brought here, or two of the reasons actually, there were the cotton plantations, and then there were indigo plantations also. So when we look historically at what was happening for the economics of the world, that was part of the infusion of what we did culturally, because we've always...
I'm glad you touched on that. I'm
Yeah.
sorry to cut you off.
No problem.
While you give that reference, give the historical reference to the
so-
textiles.
Of textiles. Well, from the African diasporic point of view, textiles are, we look at I'm going to say weaving, quilting, crochet, knitting, spinning fibers, fiber fusion. You have macrame. You have different aspects of weaving fibers together. And historically, men are the needle connectors.
Yes.
And so in Africa, we have the tapestry crocheters in Morocco. We have the tailors in Senegal. We have weavers in Ghana. We have, where else? We have in South Africa, the women spin fiber. In Guatemala, the men walk around knitting. They never look down. But when you look at fishing ports, the men make the fishing net from something that's a hook.
Taught as very small children.
As very small children, which is the crochet, because crochet is French for hook. So although it's not called that in that particular village, let's say a fishing port in Senegal, they use a hook-shaped item to hook the netting together. And when it has to be repaired, that's how to repair it. So there are all these different connections from who we are. We do look at the men as part of that culture. It's not to dismiss women. It's just that when we talk about history, we just like to be as accurate as possible when we're sharing that message.
So it's safe to say that this is an art that's passed down. It's not necessarily an oral tradition, but a physical training and tradition that's passed down.
Yes. It's definitely passed down. Like in Nigeria, when the men and boys come together in the Egungun celebration, and they bring the boys out in secret because you never know who the Egungun is because it's a masquerade. So that tradition is always passed down. The costuming or the attire is very elaborate, very detailed, always done by hand. They have the female version of the gelede, which is all part of that same kind of tradition and masquerading. And so these are things that are passed down. And when you're sitting with someone learning something, not only are you learning the art form, but you're learning about life. So
You're
it's
learning them.
right.
Yeah.
It's kind
You know what I want to do? You brought some fabulous images.
Yes, yeah.
We want to get those images on the screen and have you talk about those because they're extremely enlightening.
Yes, definitely. So this is our first exhibition, which we were awarded a grant from Lincoln Center. And it was in Avery Fisher, the Court Gallery, and it was entitled My Brother's Thread. Thread is singular because it was to say we are connected to our brothers as one. So this is the work of Jerry Gant, who is an artist out of Newark, New Jersey. And this particular piece is called We Come in Many Shades of One. And this was both exhibited at Avery Fisher as well as the New York State Museum in Albany.
And this is an example of what type of textile?
So what Jerry did here is that he took those trench coats and he was saying that we as a people are, of course, are the spectrum of different ethnic backgrounds within one. He dyed the fabric, he bleached, he does a bleaching technique. So the ties are bleached. He also does, on the ties, there's like a overlay of either a sort of, I'm going to say graffiti, as well as a pattern where he may have spray painted an image onto.
He's merging a lot of worlds here.
Oh yeah, Jerry, he is a multi-talented artist. And what we did is that there's a piece in the corner also, which he took leather and cut out the images of a face, the profile of faces. And we took the mask here to sort of once again, show the differences. And these masks probably come from different parts
Different
of
regions, yes.
different regions as well. So that's what Jerry did here.
Okay. Next slide, please.
This is Jerry again, and this is an important work. Harlem Needle Arts was tapped to commissioned by the Newberger Museum and the curator Patrice Gazon to work on a piece for Teresa Margolis, We Have a Common Thread. Teresa Margolis is a artist, Mexican artist, who's also a forensic scientist. And what she does is she goes to the sites of, let's say, a murder, and she deals a lot with death, and she will pick up evidence. And in Mexico and other places, she's allowed, after the site has been sort of secured and cleared and they have the evidence they need, she picks up evidence in different ways. It could be a broken glass. And what she did on this project is she went to 5 different countries, or 6 different countries. We were the only group in the United States that was commissioned. And we had 3 artists, Jerry Gant, Laura Gaston, and Sahara Briscoe. And we came up with the textile of a flag in our version, and it was called American Juju for the Tapestry of Truth.
Okay, okay.
And,
For those who don't know what juju is?
Juju, well, listen, there's good and bad juju in
Exactly,
all worlds.
exactly.
And sort of that.
Yin and yang, positive and negative.
Exactly. Positive and negative is that spiritual sort of incantation of something that you want to project. And in this work, we dedicated this work to all those people who had been murdered by authorities, and we have some of their images in there, but the base of the textile is even more important. When she initially came to us, she came to us with a shroud from a woman who was murdered in Mexico. So that means the blood, this shroud was wrapped over the person's body. It was sanitized. But then after she left and the project was it was in the infancy stage, the Eric Gardner verdict came out.
Okay.
And she says, you know what, this shroud doesn't represent you. We need to go to Staten Island and we need to get some life from there. So she and the curators went to Staten Island and they put a glue on the shroud and they dragged it through the space where he was killed. And then they brought it to my house. So the foundation of that is the shroud from where the site of his particular murder by the police
took place. Okay.
Yeah.
Next slide, please.
Yes, this is at the National Black Theater, and we worked on a panel discussion about textile and the legacy and stories that textile actually tells. So there's a professor from Stony Brook. I'm sorry, I forgot her name. And then we have Chief Nike Akundaye from Nigeria. We have Laura Gaston, who's a quilt artist, but also works in other mediums, glass and felting, and myself. And so this was the first time that I met Chief Nike. And as a female, she's a female chief in Nigeria.
And specifically, these arts textiles are not gender specific.
Exactly. They're not gender specific. They are open, and we teach and exhibit to everyone, as does Nike teach to everyone. But her focus for opening her spaces in Nigeria was, one, to help women who were in polygamous sort of relationships, as well as to empower women through the art forms. And these are their indigenous art forms of Adiare. I'm using my Nigerian tonal sounds here, so, but Adiare, weaving, spinning fibers. She also teaches surface design, industrial design, and people come from all over the world to her sites to learn.
And for people who are not familiar with how valuable these items may be, could you just give us a ballpark?
Someone gifted me, someone that I even, at that talk, someone came up to me who knew Nike, who I'd never met before, and gifted me a big piece of Adiare, okay? And so I embraced it, I valued it, and when I looked at the price tag, it was $700, okay? So now, these are art forms that we mimic to do here in New York, but at the same time they require like drying outdoors and things of that nature.
There's a true process
There's-
that takes days and months
Exactly.
to
manifest.
perfect and manifest, and the translation then into dollars doesn't even quite add up.
It doesn't quite add up. And also, there's also significant cultural markings that are in different types of textiles for different meanings.
What are some of the famous textiles or cloths that we know of here, like mud cloth?
Right. Mud cloth, adire, batiks. There's wax batiks. There's different types of wax batiks. There's stitch adire. There are about 7 different types of adire compilations.
Okay.
There's jahas, which is out of Senegal. There's baizan, which is a fabric that has an imprint on the background. There's tie and dye, which is a form of adire as well. There's, what else is there? Embroidery. There's quilting on tapestry. There is, oh gosh, what else is there? I'm sorry, losing my train of thought.
Don't
There's
worry.
all sorts of dyeing and crochet knitting, all of the different types of fusions.
Is it often that they're telling stories with the garments?
In many cases there are, because in many cases,
Family history.
a certain color may represent something for that family. Like in Nigeria, in contemporary times, if a family is as a unit attending a wedding or even a funeral, that particular family is going to dress in the same color.
Yes.
They're going to all go to the same tailor.
Yes.
So that represents the identity of that particular family in the room. So those are markers of who we are throughout how we foster textile.
Yeah.
Even in, as you know, even in the fraternity sorority
Yes.
aspect, those things are passed on by color.
Yes, definitely.
Or you have to wear certain things at different ceremonies. If there's a death and they're coming together to sort of represent the sorority or fraternity, they wear color. Same thing with lodges. Excuse me. Same thing with lodges. They do. This is always infused in who we are.
So it's all based culturally based.
All based
spiritually
culturally.
based,
Yeah.
yes.
I think people also they forget about those things, but it's definitely a part of all these different traditions.
Next slide, please.
This is Shei. Shei is Nike's daughter, who lives here in New York, and she taught a workshop for us, which was at the Leroy Neiman Arts Center. When we were there, we were an organization in residence. So this is stitch adire that we taught there.
Okay.
All the different designs were custom designed by each person who participated.
Okay. Next slide.
Oh, yes. We are currently, this is an exhibit which I curated called The Fabric of Emancipation, which is currently on exhibit in Vermont at the Rokeby Museum through October 28th. The artist is Lamerchi Frazier, and that's her piece, and that piece is entitled, let me get you that name right now. That piece is entitled Seen and Unseen Worlds in Search of My Mother's Garden. We were initially commissioned by the Morris Jamal Mansion, which is up on Jamal Terrace in Washington Heights in the
Yes.
hood. And that is the oldest historic site in Manhattan.
Yes.
So I think it's about 253 years old now.
I think
1765.
Every student that either went to 195 or PS 28 took a trip to
the mansion,
Yes.
right. So that mansion was built in 1765. So we were charged with doing something around the history of the mansion. So I came up with the fabric of emancipation. As Africans in the diaspora, are we really liberated? Are we really free when we're dealing with the same atrocities that we kind of dealt with in 1765? They've just been elevated to have a different kind of face. So what we did is, in this particular piece, she's envisioning what Black children at the mansion or in that neighborhood at that time period would have seen or would have gone through, how they would have dressed. And this is a quilt. So is this a different type of formation of the quilt? Because the fibers that are used are like organzas and different types of stitching.
Okay.
And that's a
I'm
report.
glad you mentioned emancipation because through my brief research, there was a lot going on in the period of kidnap, slavery, whatever they like to call it, but this quilting and these messages
Yeah.
and the tradition and the culture that's secretly hidden
Right.
in these garments.
Yeah, it's hidden in plain view, as the book says, or signs and symbols. And because we as Black people in the Americas were forbidden to be educated, to read, to sort of think, we use signs and symbols from our indigenous cultures to be able to communicate with each other. But even more, or as important, is that abolitionists and slaves that escaped, they worked together to create codes in quilts.
In quilt.
So the quilts had different symbols that would say, one symbol would say, okay, it's on the line outside of abolitionist house where you may have thought to come to rest during the day, but the symbol may say, don't stop, keep moving.
Danger, keep
There's
moving.
danger. And so let me also qualify this conversation about signs and symbols. In the academic world, they say that this is a lie, that there is no written documentation that this Underground Railroad symbols and quilt even existed.
Sometimes in an oral tradition, and I hear that criticism often when it comes to us, the diaspora, that in an oral tradition, you may not have in the inception, you might not have for hundreds of years.
That's
something
my argument.
Written
Exactly.
down. But the oral, you know,
is passed on. So it makes logical sense that this would have happened. There are charts with a number of symbols. We just did a workshop with
how are you
elders.
supposed to leave a message for someone who cannot read,
Of course.
presumably?
Exactly.
If you're not going to leave it in the forms of a pantomime or a picture.
Exactly. And that is my position about this. So when the World of Academics tried to challenge, actually in Harlem, the Frederick Douglass traffic circle, so the artist Algernon Miller designed the base of the traffic circle with signs and symbols from quilts, and it was seized for a moment because some academics from I don't want to call the wrong Ivy League institution, but they questioned it. And so it was like, no, do you understand the oral history of it? So part of our mission is documentation. And in 2019, what we have amassed since we started in 2003, but officially 2005 and 2007, is to put pen to paper.
Okay.
Because we have a history of what we've done thus far and all the connections that have been made in talking to people about their history. Why do you have that quilt? And they can tell you the stories about a quilt or a piece of textile.
These fabrics are emotional. This is not
Very.
It's not something that comes into your life for a second. It's in your life for
Forever, definitely, most definitely.
Next slide, please.
This is also part of the fabric of emancipation, and that sign says, "Caution, colored people of New York." They were kidnapped slaves. This particular sign is based on an original sign that was produced in Boston, Massachusetts. And so she reimagined this piece. So this is Sarah Bunn is the artist. She reimagined for her work in the fabric of emancipation, we wore more than shackles, a day in the life of Seneca Village. And most people did not know that Central Park is Seneca Village. All of Central Park was a Black community, and the Black people of that community were self-sufficient. They were free people.
Black free persons. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they were displaced when New York City decided to build Central Park.
Central Park. I'm going to hurry along a little bit because we're a little pressed for
Pressed for
time.
time,
Next
okay.
slide, please.
This is a workshop also at the Morris Jamal Mansion. Laura Gasson is teaching an embroidery workshop to a multi-generational group of people and families.
Is this a Mantra Monday or is this not
No,
quite affiliated?
that's not
Okay.
Mantra Mondays. But Mantra Mondays is a Monday we gather in Harlem, and we either present films, speakers, or it's just a space to start your week off doing something creative with your hands. So people it's open to the public, it's free, and you can come and just sit and work on something. Most recently, we hosted a quilt segment, so we created quilt blocks.
Okay.
So that's what Mantra Mondays is.
I got three, four more questions, but I'm going to cover them pretty quickly.
Sure.
What is artivism?
artivism is art activism. It's a way to utilize our platform to create artwork that is thought-provoking, that allows the viewer to have a call for action. So similar to the fabric of emancipation, it's think about it, but what are the actions that are we going to take as humans in our society to educate, provide resources, dispel myths about what's going on?
What are some of those myths?
Myths about the art forms?
About the art form?
Okay.
Yes.
Myths about the art forms that it's very gender specific. It's only women's work. Most notably in recent kind of couple of weeks on Instagram, there's this whole dialogue about, in some cases, white people saying they never saw black knitters, which is not true. Many have learned since they were children. And that is very gender specific. And that's not the case, as we talked about earlier.
It's about exposure.
It's exposure.
Many things that are going on, whether they're going on in America's, Central, South America, or Africa, Australia, just about exposure. If you don't,
Of course.
people don't know.
If you're not in the mix.
They'll stay in there.
Right, they stay in their
cocoon.
bubble, definitely.
Okay. What are anything that you guys are launching in the future?
Coming up, we are ongoing campaign to celebrate sort of our 12th anniversary. Like I said, the Fabric of Emancipation is on exhibit through October. We will start our series of workshops in the fall, late September. We host a trip every year to the Sheep and Wool Festival, this will be our 13th trip, going up to Rhinebeck, New York. Yes, black people do knit, crochet, quilt, and we do have time in our lives. And then the other myth that only elders do it, no. Culturally, we learn very young. We're learning at 5 years old. It's just how we choose to carry on the tradition.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. How large, is there a cost involved in this? Or?
Usually, you know what, we like to keep our costs very low. Many of our workshops are free or low cost. We do have master workshops, which tend to be sometimes like 1 to 2 day workshops, which have a higher price point, but nothing has gone over $190, but that's a master workshop. We also include all supplies with any workshop that we host. So we have, we're funded through the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, the Colby Foundation, and private donors right now.
Okay, I'm going to give you a word before I take the last word. How do people get in contact with you guys? How do they sign up?
They can reach us. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, Harlem Needle Arts. Our website is harlemneedlearts.org, and that's arts with an S. Our email is info@harlemneedlearts.org. And our telephone number is 212-491-8581.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here, my sister.
Thank you for having me, my brother.
I love you to death.
You know I love you back.
This particular art form, the textile world, please investigate it, experience it, get out there and enjoy it, because you came into this world with textiles and you're going out with textiles, and there's no way around it. Thank you very much, People's Forum. We'll see you next time.